Hi, this is a video here to help you with Chapter 13, Program 6, which is to compute the sum of the values in an array using recursion. Alright, so kind of a weird one, different than what we did in class, so I found some people struggled with it and thought I'd make a video to help get you started. Alright, so just basic idea here is if we have an array of ints, right? This one, if we add them up, you get a sum of 29. We're used to doing this with a loop, all right, where you loop through starting at position 0, which would be the 7, and you go less than the length, and you just go one spot at a time and do 7 plus 3 plus 10 plus 9. Okay, so we want to do this sort of the same thing, just using recursion. Alright, so before I get too far into the actual code, again, this is what it would look like in a loop, is I want to make sort of a plan of what it would look like. Alright, and so sort of the idea is, with recursion, you make it one step simpler. So in this case, if I was to call find sum, I made a little find sum method here. Alright, and if we just passed in the array for a moment, if I do find sum with this array, so call the method with the original array. The idea is I want to make it one step simpler. Alright, so if I called it like this, one of the ways I could make it a step simpler is take the number at the 0 position, in this case 7, and then recall the method with the remaining parts of the array. Alright, so at this point, I would just have the 3, 10, and 9, and I would take off that first number and recall the method with the 7 as part of the sum. Okay, and then we just kind of keep stringing it from here. So now find sum with that smaller array now calls it even smaller than that, breaks it down one step simpler. So I'm calling it with just the 10 and the 9, like so. And then again, find sum with 10 and 9, we'll just call it with a 10. And then when you get down to a single element like this, it wouldn't need to go recursive anymore. It could just return that find sum of 9 would just return the 9. And then we would have a string of all these things added together. Okay, so that's kind of the idea of how we make it one step simpler. The tricky part about this is if we look, the array is actually getting a different size each time. Right, so we would have to sort of take a length 4 array and create a length 3 array from these elements, which is tricky. All right, that would actually take a decent amount of work. So what I think is hard about this is the trick is you, instead of making a new array, you can keep this array the same each time, but much like we did in the loop, just change the index. All right, so the sort of the right way to set up this recursive method is to just have an array with array of ints, and then also pass in an int that is an index or position of the element, the next element that we want to sum. Alright, so originally when we call find sum, so like the first time we call this method here, I'll go back here and delete all this, we call it back here, I would call it with nums, the array I created there, but then just start at position 0 and say, okay, that's the first thing that I want to find. Okay, and then when I recall it, I would recall it with this value of 0 increased by 1. So the recursive step here, I'm not going to show all the code here, but the recursive step would return something like return the element at the 0 position. So that would be array at position IDX. I'm going to do generically, not 0. Right? The first time it'll be 0, but the next time it'll be 1 or whatever. And then I'm going to recall find sum with the same array. That's not going to change at all. And then just increase the index by 1. So plus plus to IDX. All right, so that way I don't have to recreate the array or anything. It just moves one spot down further, and it'll create that pattern that I had shown up here before, where it's 7 plus find sum of the rest of the array, then 7 plus 3 plus find sum of the rest of the array. All right, so that's roughly what the recursive step looks like, and then you have to fill in the base case and the rest of it. As always, please come see me if you need more help than that.